What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude, Rasputin. Imagine a country where the biggest enemies of the state are not religious extremists, not foreign spies, not invading armies, but writers, directors and musicians. That is Putin's Russia in 2025. The regime that once showed off its cultural heritage as proof of its greatness now treats the art as contraband and artists as criminals. We're talking about Boris Akunin, one of Russia's most famous living authors, sentenced to 14 years in prison in absentia for whitewashing terrorism, and then also foreign agent violations, or in plain English for writing books and refusing to bend the knee. We're also talking about Dmitry Bykov, Dmitry Glukhovsky, Evgenia Berkovich, and Svetlana Petriychuk, writers, directors, and playwrights branded as extremists, hunted down, or already rotting in prisons. This is not law enforcement. It is cultural liquidation. And the irony, the Kremlin is killing the very thing it once marketed to the world as the soul of Russia. Some of these people, and hundreds more going through the very same nonsense, used to be highly regarded inside the Kremlin itself. They received state awards, got standing ovations, and probably even shook hands with Putin at some point in the past. But it all means nothing once you do not fully and unconditionally support the war crimes of the regime. It is also worth mentioning that the censorship in Putin's Russia is not just about silencing critics. It's about also erasing memory itself, like these people never existed. And if they did, there was some sort of third-grade writers nobody even heard about. It's also about controlling the narratives, the reshaping reality itself. And in the end, it's not only the anti-war voices who get crushed, even the loyalists, the Z-bloggers, the flag-waving propagandists eventually face the very same hammer. That is when even the most loyal followers, now obviously ex-followers, including the ones within the walls of the Red Square, lose all their privileges and status much faster than anyone imagined possible. Because in a system where censorship reigns supreme, nobody is safe. Not the rebels, not the faithful, not even the ones who praise the king the loudest. Think about, for example, Igor Girkin. Where is this guy even now? When was the last time you heard about him? We will talk about a little bit more about him and many more who was trusted in the regime, just to be awfully betrayed later in today's video. Let's rewind for a second. In 2005, Russian cinemas were showing blockbuster adaptations of Boris Akunin's novels, like The Turkish Gambit and The State Counselor. Billboards plastered his characters across cities, TV networks hyped him up, and bookstores could not keep up with the demand. His fictional detective Erast Fandorin stood shoulder to shoulder with such figures as Sherlock Holmes and Hercule Poirot, the ultimate Russian gentleman, the perfect example of a man how he should be. Akunin was not just a writer, he was a cultural export. The kind of figure you could put on a cover of glossy magazine to show the world that Russia was not just about oil pipelines and tanks. And I'm sure some of you guys far from Russia even heard his name. Please let us know down below in the comments which books of Boris Akunin have you ever read. Now fast forward to 2025. That very same Akunin is now branded a criminal sentenced to 14 years in absentia, accused of whitewashing terrorism. A man whose biggest crime was just writing detective novels is now treated like he planted bombs literally inside Moscow. Think about the absurdity of it. A regime so fragile, so terrified of words, that it locks up authors for imagination. And Akunin is not alone. Dmitry Bykov, one of the most prominent contemporary poets and writers, is also on the run. And then Dmitry Glukhovsky, author of the Metro 2033 series, ironically books about dystopian societies trapped underground, is sentenced to years in absentia as well. I'm sure you know him guys as well. Then playwrights like Berkovich and Petriychuk are serving prison terms for a play that once earned standing ovations, but was later retroactively branded extremist. These are not isolated cases, this is a full-blown purge of culture. A war against art itself. And why? Because art remembers. Art resists. Art exposes hypocrisy in ways that court verdicts and propaganda slogans cannot. The Kremlin knows this. And so, books become bombs, plays become acts of rebellion, and metaphors become crimes. The big brother is watching, and he only decides which books you can read and which ones shall be burned. Awfully familiar, right? But these people we just talked about were relatively neutral to politics before it all happened. What about extreme loyalists and Kremlin's favorites? Do they get any different treatment? Let's talk about them in our next chapter. Now here where it gets even darker. Censorship in Russia is not just about targeting dissidents. It has blended to the ranks of the loyalists, the very same pro-war voices who cheer on Putin's special military operation. Think about Igor Girkin, the man who started the Donbass war back in 2014, the so-called hero of the Russian Spring, because who else would be the first to pop in your mind, right? This guy was not some director with a band play. He was a hardcore militant, a Z-patriot, the one who actually directed an entire genocide and approved war crimes. And yet when he started criticizing the Kremlin for incompetence, he was just thrown in prison for 4 years for now as an extremist. His name just scrubbed out of state media like he never existed. And 10 years after the war in Donbass, state TV celebrated the anniversary without even mentioning the man who started the whole thing. It just started, according to the new version of the modern Russian history, because people, quote-unquote, could not tolerate any longer, whatever it means, and then the whole thing once again just started. That is how censorship in Putin's Russia works. It does not just silence you, it erases you. And it's not just Girkin. Pro-war bloggers constantly walk on the edge of criminal charges as well. They speak in codes and euphemisms, swapping Russian army for Laotian army, so they can discuss catastrophic losses without breaking the law technically. They joke, they moan, but underneath the sarcasm is real fear. They all know Girkin's fate, and they all know that one wrong word could put them in a cell as well. Even mainstream war correspondents are not safe. Alexander Sladkov, one of the regime's most loyal talking heads, admitted that he faced charges for discrediting the Russian armed forces. He was saved only because VKTRK executives and the Kremlin personally intervened. Imagine that you've spent years glorifying war, your entire adult life spreading propaganda, and then just one single slip of honesty almost gets you jailed, for however long, God knows only one. This is the twisted beauty of authoritarian censorship. It eats its own children. The system does not reward loyalty, it punishes deviation, even if that deviation is just telling the truth about incompetent generals or supply shortages. Sooner or later, everyone crosses the invisible line, and once you do it, you are finished. So, what's left both for the opponents and the supporters of the regime, assuming they want to stay and operate inside the country? Let's answer this complicated question in our next chapter. But what happens when censorship becomes so suffocating that people start censoring themselves before the state even steps in? That is where Putin's Russia is today. Writers, journalists, and bloggers all weight their words like prisoners measuring crumbs of bread. Each sentence could be a death sentence, or at least a 10-year stretch. And so they invent codes, they self-censor, they flee abroad. For those in exile, the story is bittersweet. On one hand, they finally get freedom, real freedom. Outside Russia, they can say things plainly just without worrying about down rates or fabricated charges. But that freedom comes at a price. They lose their homes, their audiences, their security. They carry the stigma of foreign agent like a scarlet letter. And when the Kremlin slaps them with the sentences in absentia, like for example once again Akunin's 14 years, it paradoxically liberates them even further. Because once you are branded already an outlaw, what holds you back? Why mince words? You're already condemned, so just do whatever you want. Meanwhile, inside Russia, repression fuels a technological rebellion. The Kremlin bans Instagram, YouTube, Medusa Media, and then hundreds of other platforms. And then what happens? Millions of Russians learn how to use VPNs, something what we didn't even hear about 6 years ago. The very act of censorship drives people to bypass it. A teenager who just wants to play Fortnite ends up discovering banned media because the only way to fix his game is to use a VPN. That is the irony of digital authoritarianism. The harder you clamp down, the more you radicalize the very people you want to control. And so repression backfires. It creates a Russia where even apolitical citizens are nudged towards curiosity, towards dissent, towards finding out what their government does not want them to see. Because that's simply human nature. If something is prohibited, well, people just don't care as long as they don't know it's prohibited. But once you tell them, people don't look, don't go there, don't listen to these things, to this music, this is when real curiosity sparks like the brightest flashlight. At the heart of all of this lies the regime's fatal flaw. It believes that censorship guarantees stability. But censorship is not a shield, it is actually a guillotine. And eventually, it drops on everyone, including the executioner himself. In 2025, Boris Akunin's 14-year sentence was not just aimed at silencing one single writer. It was a message to the entire cultural community. Shut up or suffer. But here's the twist. It also scared the pro-war camp. Because if a writer can get 14 years for words, even not real ones, what about the blogger who complains about tactics or wars, shares a video of a destroyed Russian convoy? The real one. What about a general who whispers about losses? What about a propagandist who makes one sleep too many in his furious yelling when he's not even thinking? That is the nightmare now haunting Putin's Russia. The line between us and them has finally blurred. The dissidents get their sentences on paper in exile, but the loyalists risk real prison time at home. Cabinet ministers are eliminating themselves. Oligarchs are losing fortunes overnight. The system is devouring not just its critics, but its own supporters, and with bigger even appetite. So what's left? A war that nobody's winning, a censorship machine that silences everyone, and only one name that still profits. You guessed it, Vladimir Putin. Once upon a time, war was a career booster. You could blog your way to fame, enrich yourself through some shady contracts, or even receive acknowledgement from the Kremlin by simply agreeing with whatever Putin says. But those days are gone now. Now the circle of beneficiaries has shrunk to a single dot. Only one man at the top. Once again, you guessed it. Everyone else is expendable, replaceable, disposable. Censorship was supposed to be the Kremlin's ultimate weapon. Silence the critics, control the story, win the war. Simple as that. Instead, it has become a wrecking ball that smashes everything in its path. Writers, artists, and then loyalists, generals, ministers, and eventually the regime itself. But here's the thing. The more they censor, the more they reveal their fear. The more they repress, the more they drive people underground, online, abroad, and into the resistance in the end. The guillotine of censorship never stops once it is set in motion. It does not discriminate, it does not forgive, and sooner or later, it always claims the hands that built it. That is the future of Putin's Russia, a country where silence is law, speech is crime, and even the most loyal servant can wake up tomorrow as the next biggest enemy of the state. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support my work, there are links down below, for example, Patreon. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell, their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.